Wonderful. Thank you so much. Thank you everyone for joining us this afternoon. We are really looking forward to this presentation. This is supporting small businesses, offsetting unemployment, with our Chief of Economic Development, Betsy Cowan, and I will let her take it away.
Great, good afternoon, everyone. It's great to see everyone joining us. I suppose one of the fortunate elements of this virtual world is that folks from all over our region can join us for a 1-hour presentation, so we're really thrilled that you all are here. I'm Betsy Cowan. I'm the Chief of Economic Development at MAPC, and this presentation was put together with help from Raul Gonzalez, who's going to be speaking in a moment, and Jen Kaplan, who will speak at the end of the presentation. I also do want to thank Sasha Perotti, Elise Harmon, and many other people on our team who've been working hard to put together these webinars. We're really happy to be here this afternoon. So I'm going to briefly just share who we are as an economic development team, and then I'll get into the content of the presentation. The majority of the presentation will be focused on small businesses, which frankly is great timing because all of you are thinking about the reopening process. I know the Governor's Advisory Board is thinking about that this week. Our team has been involved in giving them recommendations, particularly on small businesses, but also on the public health end and on municipal support and ways that the administration can continue to support all of you as municipal leaders. So all of you are thinking about ways that you can help businesses reopen, but then also how you can help unemployed individuals in your community. So today we'll be talking about both of those. Just a brief note about who we are in terms of the economic development team at MAPC. So there's 4 of us on our team, small but mighty, and we work with a number of municipalities around our region. And again, for those who are outside of the MAPC region, our region is essentially the 495 belt. So we work with 101 municipalities and provide them with a number of different tools to support them to implement economic development programs and policies that advance smart growth, as well as regional collaboration. And equity is something that we care very deeply about. And you all have seen in your communities the way that this epidemic, the pandemic, certainly is affecting people in different ways. And equity is at the center of everything we do, thinking about vulnerable populations. And in terms of economic terms, thinking about the small businesses that have less access to resources, or people who are financially insecure, how do we help them get on better footing? Before we get into the meat of the presentation, I did want to turn it over to Raul Gonzalez to talk briefly about a funding opportunity through a federal agency called the Economic Development Administration. So I'll turn it over to you, Raul.
Thank you so much, Betsy. Good afternoon, everyone. I am Raul Gonzalez, and I'm a senior planner here at MAPC. I want to take a little bit of time to talk about the Economic Development Administration's CARES Act Recovery Assistance Program. These grants are intended to be flexible and responsive. Municipalities can be able to apply, and investments will support a wide range of both non-construction and construction activities in regions experiencing severe economic dislocations brought about by the COVID-19 pandemic. To be eligible for funding, applicants must clearly explain in their application how their project would prevent, prepare for, or respond to economic injury as a result of COVID-19. Depending on need, an 80% EDA funded project with a 20% applicant match is possible. For more information, you can reach out to me at rgonzalez@mapc.org or click on the link in the chat box or on the bottom of the PowerPoint presentation that Betsy shared with you. Thank you so much, and back to you, Betsy.
Great, thank you, Raul. And just a note before we get into the presentation, all of you who registered should have gotten a copy of the presentation along with a small business guide that we just released yesterday with recommendations for municipalities to help small businesses reopen. We'll be sending out materials after the webinar, but if you do want to access those real time, you should have access to the PowerPoint presentation as long as the guide that we just released. So I'm going to go into our small business assistance project, and this project formed the basis for the small business guide recommendations that were put out yesterday. So I'll talk about that briefly, and then we'll get into the meat of the recommendations. So we've been doing a project with several different communities, and I wanted to highlight them here. And special thanks to the City of Salem for being our lead on this project. This was funded through a combination of district local technical assistance funding through the state, and also some of our internal funds. And this project really was designed to help these communities think about ways to support small businesses in the immediate response, but also longer term recovery. And it was great to work both with the municipality and also with chambers, who are excellent partners of ours. And I know that there are a number of chambers on the call today, and we're grateful for all of the support that you're providing to small businesses. So I wanted to highlight first some key principles of this project and principles that are really guiding our recommendations. And I'll just make a note that my background and my heart is actually in small business development. I started out as a Main Street director for a Main Street organization in Boston, and then went on to lead technical assistance programs for the City of Boston for small businesses. So my heart is in the work that all of you are doing day to day with small businesses. And we know that they really serve as the background for neighborhood revitalization. And one of the key things that we're recommending to municipalities, as hard as it is and as hard as you're working, is all of you have learned now to become entrepreneurial. You're putting everything online. You're thinking about ways to create new projects and programs. And so this is an opportunity to respond to the needs of businesses in an entrepreneurial and flexible way. We would certainly recommend that all of you have been thinking about this, is ways that you can involve the community as you think about the support that you're going to be providing. There have been a lot of creative pieces of feedback or ideas from business owners themselves. And so that should be considered as you're putting together recommendations. And finally, we would recommend that you look at best practices from other communities and other states. Our team compiled a list of practices around how other states are handling the reopening process, but then certainly looked at a number of different communities. Obviously, our region is known for many of its strengths, but there's a number of different regions across the country that are doing really creative small business support. So I wanted to highlight 5 key principles that guided our recommendations and really guided our work. And first, and you all know this, you who are on the call, small businesses are a major part of our economy. They're huge in number, but also in terms of their employment. They really provide a sense of place. You know how a neighborhood business district feels. And you all, as municipal leaders, but also as support agencies and different partners who are on the call, you play a real key role, both in terms of providing financial assistance and helping them generate revenue, but then also helping them think about ways that they can reduce expenses. And we'll go into that in further detail later in the presentation. Certainly, as we've all seen, this is a new environment. This is a new reality. A lot of people have been talking about ways that, first there was this immediate response, but now businesses are evolving to provide different services and different products. They're certainly constrained by physical distancing measures. And so they're thinking about, how do we interact with our customers in this new way? And so creative public policy and programs, and certainly use of public space, is an excellent way to support businesses as they adapt to this new reality. We certainly, as a data agency, we recommend that you evaluate the impact of your support. And I know all of you, again, are strapped. You're doing 5,000 different things, so this might feel like adding something on. But if you're able to build in quantitative and qualitative evaluation from the very beginning, this will be a way to track what you're doing, tracking the number of businesses that are opening and closing, getting a sense from business owners themselves of how they're feeling. We'll go into this in more detail. And finally, our agency, as I mentioned, is really committed to equity. And we think a lot about businesses that are owned by a number of different vulnerable populations and in our work, and thinking about creative ways that you can particularly support those businesses as they weather this crisis. So I did just want to present a framework that we've been using as we think about this recovery process. And certainly, it's something that we think about as a loop. So actually on this slide, the response is at the bottom, and then you go to recovery, mitigation, and preparedness. But this is a loop as we're thinking about how to respond. Certainly there's an immediate response, but then we're going to go back up to recovery, and we want businesses to recover strong to get the support and resources they need. And then we're going to think about mitigation. So how do we help businesses become stronger? Certainly we've been seeing that some businesses can't go more than a month of being closed for many obvious reasons in terms of how tight their margins are. So how do we help them mitigate future shutdowns or future economic disruptions? And then particularly, how do we help them be prepared? So what are the resources that can help build their bottom line? What are the technical assistance that can help them build new business models? So all of this we're taking into consideration as we do this work. And our goal is that they would be more resilient. So every time we go through this cycle, and certainly every time our districts and our communities go through this cycle, we would be more and more resilient. So I wanted to highlight three main goals that we recommend that municipalities focus on when they're providing support to small businesses. And I would say focusing on one at the expense of another, certainly we recommend that you focus on all three, because all three of these will help businesses be able to survive and thrive in this new environment. Protecting health and safety I'll go into, and then helping businesses increase their revenue, but also helping them decrease the cost of doing business. So first, around protecting health and safety, obviously there's some guidelines that are going to be coming out at the state level. And again, the Reopening Advisory Board has been doing significant work on this, and we've been providing guidance to them around these points. But there are a number of things that municipalities and other support providers can do to help small businesses adapt to these new regulations. And there's a list here, but certainly accessing to PPE, accessing testing sites, signage in multiple languages. You can certainly assist them with webinars and other online information. And then ensuring that there's a staff member at every business who's in touch with the local public health department to help them receive information and then provide timely updates. On the increasing small business revenue, we have a number of different recommendations. So I'm going to go into them, not in too much detail, because we really want to open this up to Q&A. But we do think that there's a number of creative ways that municipalities can help businesses increase revenue. I do want to just note a couple considerations before we begin. First is we're going to have a number of outdoor vending options that I'll get to in a second. And certainly we want to say all of these recommendations should be done to ensure proper physical distancing, sanitation, and all of the proper guidelines to ensure public health and safety. And another note, a lot of people are considering touchless point of sale options and different ways that people can do a payment without directly interacting with employees. But certainly that's not an option for everyone. So not everyone has access to credit, or not everyone is banked. And so we do want municipalities to think about ways to consider safe cash options. So there's a number, as we mentioned, there's a number of opportunities for businesses to sell goods and services, and expanding the opportunities for them is going to be key. So first, in terms of in-person, there are a number of recommendations, and essentially what we're thinking about is how do you help businesses really, expand the walls of their business, not physically, but help them access new spaces where they can provide goods and services. So this is curbside pickup, allowing street vending, outdoor seating, and a number of other elements. I do want to say here that again, and I'm just noticing that there might be an issue in the chat. So I'm just going to flag that. And so we'll take 1 second. Okay. So we're just going to take a quick pause. Thank you everyone for your patience. All right, so we'll continue. So first, just around the in-person options, as I mentioned, one thing certainly to consider is how do we protect health and safety? So how do we make sure that these options are done, protecting the health and safety of all the customers? The other thing that I do want to say is that this obviously involves changes in municipal regulations, and all of you have a lot on your plate. And so this might just involve some creative thinking around what regulations can we change, and then also what regulations do we really not want to change because of many other considerations. Obviously, facilitating delivery services has been key, and we know a lot of people are supporting their restaurants in particular with delivery. One thing we have noticed is the high cost of delivery services themselves. Some municipalities have actually intervened to cap the cost. And then online fulfillment. So this is, there was an order, this was put out a couple weeks ago to allow businesses to provide goods and services through online delivery. And so allowing personnel actually to be on site to be able to do that. But certainly we know many businesses don't have the capability to be online. And so providing them technical assistance is going to be key. Technical assistance, speaking of, is going to be very key in terms of all of these key business types. And we've just, highlighted a few here. There's a number for you as municipal staff or as chambers that you might want to focus on as well. But certainly childcare is going to be important for everyone as we start getting back up and running. What are the options for childcare assistance? So there's a number of ways that we can think about helping these different types of businesses, but I did want to highlight a few key elements. So one is just, again, assistance with getting personal protective equipment and understanding the regulations, financial assistance, technical assistance, expanding opportunities to do business outside, and creating partnerships with local organizations. One thing that I do want to say, and we've talked a lot about this, I know there's been significant frustration at the federal level with the funding that was available for small businesses that dried up in a second. And we know that many of you in your municipalities or chambers are thinking about creative financial assistance, but certainly there's other ways that you can provide valuable assistance to businesses, and it can often be equal or if not more than the value of the financial assistance that you're able to provide. So we did just want to note that just because I think it's important to consider the limited financial options that we might have, but also the ways that we can support businesses in other ways. So finally, I did want to talk about the ways to decrease the cost of doing business. And it's important to note a few things on this. And I'm going to be talking about tax abatements and waiving different permit fees and other things. And I do just want to note, obviously, this has municipal finance considerations. So we don't make these recommendations lightly. We know many of you as municipal leaders are looking at your books and trying to figure out the ways that you're going to be financially solvent while also providing the needed assistance. So I would certainly recommend thinking about that. What permits could we potentially waive the fee of? I did talk to one mayor in one community who said, it's going to actually be fairly easy for us to waive the liquor license fee for certain types of businesses because it's really, X amount of money, it's not going to be that much to our bottom line. Other communities might land differently on that. So certainly I would recommend that you conduct a brief cost-benefit analysis to determine which ones of these are feasible. And then, I want to make just a few recommendations on the regulatory side. So first, as I mentioned, around permit and license fee waivers, certainly, these ones we recommended as kind of key business waivers, but there's a number that you might want to consider. So business license fees or vending and providing goods outside, other permits and licenses for key business elements. I mentioned the liquor licenses, and then the common victualler's license, which for those who don't know is a restaurant license. It's one of my favorite names for a license. And then certainly, sorry about that. Sorry about that. I think we had a little issue trying to get access to the PowerPoint. So I'm just going to do that again. Apologies. Thank you everyone for your patience. All right. Sorry about that. We are real time, so things happen. So in terms of permit and license fee waivers, again, thinking about takeout, permits for sale of additional goods and services. We noted that in Boston, there are a number of restaurants that are actually selling groceries. So that's been a great option for them to generate additional revenue. Certainly, again, outdoor vending, outdoor seating. And this was a recommendation that we received from our partners in the arts and culture world, thinking about home-based businesses with online sales. So allowing them to sell by right in accordance with health and safety regulations. As I mentioned, again, it's going to be very important to provide technical assistance to adapt to these new regulations, the support to secure personal protective equipment and cleaning supplies, access to testing sites, and a number of different elements there. I did want to note as we wrap up, and then again, we're going to get into a good Q&A because I know there's a number of folks on the call. One thing that we do want to say is temporary measures should be well documented and evaluated, because this could be an opportunity actually to start doing business differently as a municipality and support different businesses in a different way. Certainly, again, unfortunately, we are thinking about the potential for a shutdown to happen again. We're hoping that that won't be the case, but if it's possible that the pandemic does see an uptick again in the fall or winter, implementing these creative recommendations and then evaluating them could be a way of saying, what can we do now to prepare for a future reopening process? And then also, what can we do to make these regulatory reforms permanent? So what are the ways that we can actually continue to do the work that we're doing right now and make some of these changes more permanent around outdoor seating or other more creative ways for businesses to do business? And finally, I would note just from a system level, it's important really to consider how do we make these changes now, but that they can be used in the future. So if you're using any new system to document business closings or business openings or vacancy rates, how do you develop that system so it can be used when we go back into, when we're back up and running and more open? Are there ways that you can continue to use that data system? So I wanted to highlight a few kind of key next steps that we think are going to be key as municipalities think about ways to help businesses reopen. The first one, I know all of you are looking at that and saying, yes, that's very important, and also thinking about how that's even going to be possible with all the work that you all are doing. But certainly ensuring adequate staffing and hours of operation, particularly for regulatory functions. I know some municipalities are thinking about extending their hours of operations for permits and licenses and for inspections to allow for more flexibility. Area universities, colleges, foundations, and other organizations can certainly provide additional capacity. It's important to compile data, and we will say that again and again, both understanding how many businesses are in your community and what's the impact that you're actually seeing on the ground. We've developed a survey template, so we'll send that out afterward. So there's an easy way that you can survey your businesses to ask about their experience. And finally, providing support and materials in multiple languages is going to be really important in terms of the materials and the information that you're providing. Many of your communities, and certainly the small businesses in your communities, come from a number of different cultural backgrounds. And so allowing them to access materials that they can easily understand and share within their community is going to be key. And we would recommend engaging a working group of small business leaders, financial institutions, support providers, academic institutions. Many of you do this already. This is where the chambers are going to be very important in their work and all of your advocacy for small businesses. So as municipal staff, certainly you're strapped, but if there's ways that you can engage with a number of different partners, that certainly will provide you with the capacity that you need. And finally, we would recommend that you develop a decision-making framework. So, one of the main things that came up in the project that we're doing with those municipalities and with the Needham Chamber of Commerce is, how do we make decisions about which support to allocate into which business? And that we know is a very tricky question for all of you as municipal leaders and municipal staff. So just saying, what are the goals of the assistance? Do we want to preserve jobs? Are there particular businesses that we want to preserve that the municipality should target? Certainly, what's our capacity to provide support currently, and what will it be in the next year? And then what is the capacity of our partners? And this again is thinking about a number of the people who are on the call are chambers or other organizations that are supporting businesses, Main Street organizations. How do we work with them to provide the support so we can ensure success over the next year? And we are a data agency. We're a proud data agency. So of course, we're going to include some recommendations around developing an evaluation framework for this. So we'd recommend a few quantitative and qualitative metrics. And again, I'm sure you can't tackle all of these, but these are a few that we would recommend, which will allow you to understand the impact of what you're doing. Sales tax and meals tax certainly is provided at the state level, but there's a number of different municipal data points that could be helpful for you in terms of permits and licenses, inspections that are completed. One thing that one of our partners recommended also was to include the commercial vacancy rate and even create a vacancy location database. I know some communities are thinking about doing that. And on the qualitative side, I'll just say some of this data, even data just around the number of businesses that you have in your community, it's already out of date. And a number of people have asked us, do you have any up-to-date information on the number of businesses in our community? And the answer is no, because things are happening real time. So certainly thinking about ways that you can supplement that with qualitative information. So, how are business owners feeling about the future? What's their perception of current conditions? What are their needs? How are consumers feeling? Do they feel safe while they're engaging in commerce? What other things do they want the municipality to be doing? And then finally, and I'll hit on this again, but I know municipal staffing is a major challenge right now, but thinking about who is the staff, and this could be a partner from another organization that would be collecting this data. What are the qualitative data collection tools like? And again, as I mentioned, we have a survey template that we'll share at the end of this presentation. And then how frequently do we want to collect the data? How are we going to store it? Do we have a database already? Are we going to adapt an existing database or create one? And then how are we going to report on this information? Certainly providing, and engaging with customers and really helping them understand what's happening is going to be key. And so are there ways that the municipality can provide information both to businesses but also to your community? And I would note, one thing that's come up often is how do we also encourage customers to understand what businesses are going through? So even sharing information from these surveys, obviously sensitively and protecting business owner information. I know all of you probably heard about the case of the ice cream shop in Cape Cod and just how challenging it was because the customers didn't really understand or weren't sensitive to the regulations and kind of the conditions that the ice cream shop was operating under. So certainly sharing that information back, but also messaging to your residents, here's how we're keeping you safe. Here's what the businesses are able to do. And here's how we're supporting the businesses as well. So that ends the section around small business. So I'm actually going to stop sharing and we'll be able to see each other's faces. And then we'll get into a quick discussion, a little Q&A. I know that was a lot of information and we apologize for some of the technical difficulties there. So I'm going to turn it over to Emily to facilitate a brief Q&A, and then we'll get right back into a discussion on the unemployment assistance that your municipal. Over to Emily.
Great, thank you so much, Betsy. Can everyone hear me? Just give me a thumbs up. Can you hear me? Yeah, okay, great. So if you have any questions, we're gonna be taking questions. If you could raise your virtual hand. So if you click on participants and you can, there's a button there that says, raising your hand. I'm gonna be scrolling through, seeing if anybody has a question. I already saw a hand. You can also write your question in the chat box. Let's see, there was someone that I saw. All right, so Sue, I'm going to be unmuting you. If you could ask your question. Salamoff.
I'm still on, okay.
There you are.
Hi, Sue Salamoff, member of the Natick Board of Selectmen. I think the basic overall information that you've given is going to be very helpful. The concern I have is the recognition of the fact that our fiscal 21 budget is already losing $8.3 million, which is going to mean cuts to both the municipality and the schools. One of the contributors to the decisions that the Board of Selectmen have already made has to do with revenue loss, as well as the potential expense to actually operate the town government. So the identifiers that you've used to kind of help out the small businesses are in recognition that we're actually losing out on hotel meals tax revenue. We expect lost revenue or delayed revenue relative to actually fourth quarter tax payments. We're losing all the permitting, licensing, especially our highest individual license is paid by alcohol service. So I'm trying to figure out how all this comports when we're already losing substantial functions. And I have to tell you, I can't tell you how many emails I have because on the list of school committee possible cuts affect possible closing of an elementary school. So, I mean, basically, I'm putting that forward to you, and we're a community of 35,000 people.
Thank you, Sue, for the question. And I'm assuming many of you on the call have the same exact question. If you're municipal leaders and municipal staff or elected officials and you're looking at how you're going to balance your budgets. And Sue, I don't want to pretend to have an easy answer on that. So I think that's where, that's why we wanted to provide a range of recommendations because some things, as I mentioned, that one mayor that I talked to who said, it's going to be easy for us. I think it was 12 liquor licenses that they said, why don't we waive the fee? That's going to be easy for us in terms of our bottom line, but certainly other, licenses or things they're not going to do because of the quantity. So that's really where they're making this cost benefit analysis of if we do this, will this help the businesses get up and running more quickly and help them with their bottom line. Other communities are thinking about other creative ways to do this. And again, that's why we wanted to recommend all these outdoor vending options and other ways to help businesses expand their place of operation. And again, that does take municipal staff time. Certainly that's a lot of energy and effort. But I know a lot of volunteers are helping with that. And there's a lot of creative thinking around how do we expand outdoor options. So that's where we're trying to, pull all the different levers that we can to make sure, again, that we're protecting municipal budgets. So I don't know that's an entirely satisfying option. I do know that some communities are actually thinking about, could we, explore bonds based on what we're expecting that we might get in if we help businesses get up and running. So some people are exploring that to say, if we're able to provide X amount of assistance, could we potentially explore a bond? So a little bit of a cost benefit analysis. I know some people are exploring that. I don't think there's an easy way to do it. So I appreciate your question. I'm sure other folks have similar questions that are on the call. I'll turn it back over to you, Emily.
Great, thank you. I just wanted to let people know that if you're on the phone, you can click *9 and we can also call on you that way. So is there anyone else that has a question or comment to share? Jen Constable, can I unmute you? I just saw your comment. Jen, are you there?
I'm here. Thanks, Emily. Thanks, Betsy, for this. This is really helpful and timely. My question is around whether or not I'm just curious if there's been any discussion around how municipalities and businesses might be able to balance some of the orders that are out there right now with expanding, for example, their service areas. So balancing maintaining social distancing while allowing businesses to use sidewalk space and really encouraging additional customer base, or things like the face covering order and how we might allow a restaurant to open up. Last I knew, I can't eat and wear a face covering at the same time. So we want to encourage entrepreneurship and thinking outside the box in support of businesses, but at the same time, I know on the municipal side, we have a lot of residents that are very concerned about people being out and about.
It's a great question. So I'll give a couple thoughts on our end. And again, I don't want to say any of this is easy. So we are all figuring it out collectively. But there's a few thoughts on this. So one thing that we've been thinking a lot about is obviously the state is going to come out with some clearer guidelines. And we certainly think it's the role of you all as municipal leaders. How do you message that very clearly and support the businesses on those guidelines? And as I noted with the Cape Cod example too, how do you message that back to your customers as well to say, here's what we're doing to help you feel safe? Everyone has different comfort levels with safety. So I don't want to say it's easy. But one thing we've been consistently recommending too is just consistent guidelines so that folks wouldn't go from one community to the next because they feel safer in one particular community. One thing that we've been thinking a lot about and we've talked to our transportation department about is, again, trying to expand the entire breadth of options that businesses can access in terms of outdoor vending. So this is literally thinking about opening up the street, again, in partnership with your DPW and your transportation department and thinking about that carefully. But obviously we want to maintain ADA compliance on the sidewalk and help people feel safe when they're navigating each other on the sidewalk. So then could there be vending options on the street? Could you close the street completely and then allow for restaurants to set up there? Certainly, you know, there would again have to be some changes in municipal regulations or things that you're allowing, but that also could help to really open up the space and help people feel more comfortable interacting. I know, you know, on the restaurant side in particular, Jen, I know it's going to be complicated because, you know, I was even thinking, would I feel comfortable going to a restaurant where a waiter is, you know, serving me with a mask on? And so we're thinking about creative ways to adapt. I'm looking at Greg Riebman from the Newton Needham Chamber, who had a great webinar the other day with restaurants. So I know a lot of restaurant owners are really thinking about creative ways to solve this. So Jen, I don't know if that's an entirely satisfying answer, but I think it goes to state guidelines that are clear, municipal messaging around what the businesses need to do and how they can comply. And one note I would say from our public health department too is just we would love to kind of get the message of, you know, education and support and then enforcement. We know a lot of people are going to have challenges certainly around, you know, just complying. And so we want to make sure obviously that we're making, you know, keeping public health and safety in the forefront, but educating and helping people get access to the materials that they need.
Thank you, Betsy. We also have Mark Drayson, our Executive Director, on the line, who also wanted to add a note. But I did want to also take Amai's question. If a business is allowed to expand into a public space, is there a liability to the municipality? So also something to think about. And Mark, if you wanted to make your comment.
I'm just responding somewhat to Jen's comment and following up a little on what Betsy had to say. I cannot be 100% sure, but based on the knowledge that we have, I think it is unlikely that either restaurants or outside vending are going to be allowed in phase 1 of the reopening. Now, people may have differing views on that one way or the other, but I'm just kind of stating the facts. We're probably going to have to wait until phase 2. One good thing about that is, and we don't know when phase 2 is going to begin, but one good thing is it gives us a little more time to plan. And I think people need to look at it kind of in that way. A lot of these actions are, it's like planning for actions 2 weeks, 4 weeks, 6 weeks, 8 weeks down the road that wouldn't actually be appropriate now. And you have to kind of accept that and say, okay, but we want to be ready for when they are appropriate. You should also know that we have been indicating to the state administration that they should allow municipalities to be more restrictive, not less restrictive, but more restrictive if they wish, because it could be that there's a time when outside seating at restaurants is appropriate in a lot of communities, but certain communities may consider it not to be. If in the course of your thinking about this and planning, you feel there are any legal or regulatory or even liability related impediments to being able to do some of the things that we're asking you to consider, like outside seating or using public spaces, or even repurposing private parking lots with the agreement of the owner. If you think there are impediments to any of these things, let us know, and our legal team can look into this. And even this morning in a conversation with the Lieutenant Governor, she referenced the importance of trying to catalog and then address any legal impediments to the recommendations. Let me stop there, sorry.
Great, thank you, Mark. I'm just going to take Bruce Rosenberg. You had a question?
Yes, I wanted to follow up on something that I think Betsy made a brief reference to, and it's a question. I chair the Economic Development Committee in Westford. It's what I would refer to as an A&A, advise and assist. I mean, most of us are not elected officials, we're appointed. So the question I have is related to what might make sense in terms of some towns that are contiguous with one another, trying to come up with some commonality. And what I'm thinking about is, you probably all heard when Georgia opened up aggressively before other local states, there was influx from South Carolina and so on. So personally, for example, when I do food shopping, it may be anywhere from Westford to Chelmsford, to Littleton and Acton. And I would think that some of the towns, in order to have this equitable approach and in order to be manageable, would want to do things in some common fashion.
Bruce, it's almost as though you're a plant of ours, encouraging us to think regionally and help municipalities work together. I really appreciate the question. You know, I used to work in, as I mentioned, in small business development for the city of Boston, and we had these maps that didn't show Cambridge or any of those, the nearby municipalities, but we said customers are coming from there, right? And businesses certainly don't know municipal boundaries. So yes, as a simple answer to your question, and again, thank you for your volunteer work. It's much appreciated. As I mentioned, so the group of communities that we're working with, they are not geographically contiguous, but they're sharing best practices, right? So this is, what types of assistance are we offering and how are we doing it? But certainly thinking about shared recommendation, shared regulations. Are we going to have some consistency? Maybe a consistent marketing campaign for several different communities to message together, here's how we're protecting the health and safety of our customers, could be an option. That's where, as Mark said, we're recommending and really pushing for consistent state guidelines so that there's no confusion and, no kind of one municipality is doing one thing and one's doing another. But then on the other things where you have more leeway, maybe all of your communities could do outdoor vending and just have, maybe market that and promote that well. So I really appreciate that question. I'm going to turn it back over to Emily just for a quick time check, and I think we'll get back into the rest of the presentation.
Great. We have one more question for Jack, but we're going to hold that. If you could finish up the presentation, we will have time after 2 or 3 more slides to go into some more questions. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Emily. So I'm just going to quickly go through. So we've talked about small business, and I'll just say, from my experience, again, working with small businesses, this is often kind of divorced from all of the workforce development thinking. We actually think that they're one and the same. And I'll just note, I think one of the big challenges and something that we're thinking a lot about is how are small businesses going to rehire some of their staff or hire new staff? We know, certainly some of the wages at small businesses are challenging because of their tight margins. And so, a lot of the thinking that we've been doing is how do we help small businesses rehire and generate the revenue that they need to hire well. So we've been doing a separate project, and this is broader than small business. This is focused on overall unemployment, working with a number of different municipal partners that you'll see here, along with Mass Hire Career Centers and also a number of excellent state partners. I did want to just call out Somerville for being the lead on this project. This again is funded by district local technical assistance at the state level, and then Somerville was gracious enough to offer some of their funding as well to complement this. So again, here's the framework, and you'll see this come up a number of different times in this presentation. So we're thinking about immediate response, but then recovery. So how do we help people recover from their unemployment situation? How do we mitigate the damage? And then how do we prepare for the next cycle? And again, we are thinking potentially of future shutdowns, but also what are the other economic shocks? I think one of the things that is not going to be a surprise to any of you who are on the call, but is just how vulnerable some of our population is, that they couldn't even withstand losing 1 or 2 paychecks. So that really talks about both the need for longer term workforce development, but also financial stability and support for vulnerable populations. So I'm going to go through this quickly, and I'll just say the first half of this presentation was really focused on immediate next steps and all of the things that you can do to help businesses open, because that's happening right now. This is more of a framework, and we're still fleshing this out with our partners, so we haven't fully gotten all of their feedback, and this we're going to tweak over time because all of this is kind of a rapidly evolving situation. So I know a number of our partners are on the call, and we'll be getting your feedback on this. So this is nowhere near done yet, and we'll be putting up the final version on our website when we've completed this. But we did just want to get this out initially in front of all of you to say, what are the ways that you can think about supporting unemployed individuals in your communities? So the first is just around determining the need. And I will say one note on unemployment data, which is that it's not available at the local level. So we can get state unemployment data, but it's not available by municipality. We're working on that with the state because that certainly will provide a benefit for all of your communities. So we actually we did a webinar several weeks ago looking at, so based on the number of people who are unemployed, what are the housing and basic assistance needs? And you can see that on our website. But that's certainly something that we're working on with all of these communities to help them understand who's unemployed. And then based on that, what is the basic financial assistance that they need? The second step is then determining resources. And this is looking at municipal capacity. So some communities actually have excellent workforce development programs. Other communities are much smaller and might defer to other workforce organizations or to the workforce, the mass hire partners. But what's the capacity that we have? Do we have any funding? Do we have staffing? What's the capacity of our partners, all the community-based organizations? One thing I should note in this, we got some good feedback from our partners that employers should be at the center of all of these conversations. So what are employers doing to provide benefits to their employees, or are they able to? What are the needs of those employers as they're thinking about laying people off, and what do they need in terms of refilling those positions once things reopen? And then in the third step of this kind of immediate response is partnering with these community-based organizations. So a number of municipalities have been partnering with the United Way. They've been setting up city funds, and I know there's a number of other similar funding sources that have been developed essentially to meet basic needs. And what we're seeing, obviously, is we know the extreme cost of housing in our region means that people were actually pretty vulnerable before this. That's not going to be a surprise to any of you on the call. But this situation then made them even more vulnerable. So thinking about access to those types of funding, food assistance. Cambridge actually did a really creative program where they partnered with restaurants to provide food to vulnerable individuals. That was a great way to essentially keep the restaurants with some revenue, but to provide the food to people who needed it. In this phase, a number of people are thinking about helping people with unemployment benefits. So how do you access the system? And then one thing I'll note, and this, you'll see this throughout our whole presentation, we love data, not just because we're data nerds, but we really think it's important to evaluate what you're doing and what the impact is. So, one of our partners who's been working with us on this said, it's just so important to document and evaluate. What are we doing? Is it working? Who are we reaching? What should we do differently next time? So then we're kind of saying this next phase is recovery, and I'll go through this more quickly because we do want to get to Q&A at the end, but this is thinking about, again, immediate job placement when appropriate. I'm going to turn it over to Jen on my team very quickly just to talk about how we're thinking about immediate employment options for unemployed individuals.
Thanks, Betsy. So something that we did in the initial phases of this project was to look into who is hiring right now after the governor ordered non-essential businesses to close back in March. And I think in our initial analysis, what we found really wouldn't be surprising to too many people on this call. So many fast food chains, big box stores are continuing to hire. And then in addition to that, we started to track what we were calling pre-COVID salary rates versus current salary rates, which are all running consistently close to minimum wage. Albeit a few have provided extra benefits that are running through April and May. But this is all happening within a landscape of more and more folks being laid off and then having the option to apply for unemployment benefits. So the questions that we're really starting to ask and just brought up was, what does it mean for an individual who is laid off looking for a job to take a position where they're making less than unemployment benefits? What are the safety considerations that have to be weighed? Is it safe to take a job at a sort of larger store right now if the health and safety regulations that are needed are not in place? So these are some of the questions that just might be coming up. And of course, this evolves every single day as things continue to change. And moving forward, what we're hoping to do with this data is really partner with the career centers in our region, finding ways to get our municipalities the most up-to-date information on hiring opportunities. And Betsy's going to talk a little bit more about that as she moves forward in this stage of the recovery phase.
Thanks, Jen. So as Jen mentioned, one of the things that's just been staggering to us, and again, no surprise to any of you on the call, is just the low wages of these essential workers. And it's something we've been really thinking about, both in terms of assistance, but also what's the longer term policy implications here? How do we help people get into higher wage positions, but also how do we help support those workers who are in lower wage positions? What are the supports for those jobs? How can we upskill the job, as people have been talking about? So I'm briefly going to go through this, but as you go through the recovery phase, and this is really where we are now, how do you facilitate long-term job placement? So again, some people are going to choose or need to, for whatever reason, stay on unemployment benefits. And for many of them, that's their only option. But how do we help them get into a longer term job placement? This is some of the work we're going to be doing with our Mass Hire Career Center partners, with workforce development partners, with the municipalities, thinking about these longer term options. What industries are hiring right now? Certainly some are hiring. We know there's a number of obviously needs in public health and manufacturing for N95 masks and a number of different industries that are actually experiencing higher demand. Then in the mitigation phase, this is really where we're thinking about how do we help people then develop or redevelop their financial stability. So again, long-term workforce development support. Then thinking about all the ways that you can help people enhance their income. There's a number of different elements there. Some of us are really thinking about entrepreneurship support, some, both in terms of helping existing businesses, but maybe someone might be thinking, if I have unemployment right now, would it be an opportunity for me to start my own business if I do have the resources to do that? What are sustainable, more sustainable business models in this new environment? And then certainly financial management. And again, that's something that you can partner with other organizations on. But that's, this situation has really highlighted how challenged people were financially even before this crisis. And then finally, the last element is really thinking about preparedness. And one thing that all of us have been talking about is we do think that this is going to be cyclical. And so, as devastating as it's going to be, it also gives us a potential opportunity to think about how do we better prepare for this next cycle and what's going to happen down the road as the pandemic evolves. And so certainly thinking about what are the industries that experience the highest layoffs. So we have an analysis of that. How do we target workers in those industries? How do we work with the employers in those industries to help them weather the next potential shutdown? How do we again help people support their income and get the access to resources like computers or internet? How do we have better communication systems? And this is something I know all of you are thinking about. How do we get cell phone numbers from residents, and what are the creative ways to incentivize them to provide that? Because we found those to be texting to be really successful. How do we communicate in a variety of different languages? And again here, documenting and evaluating. So really thinking about what are we doing that's working, and what could we do to improve this? I know this is a lot. This is kind of a basic framework that we're thinking about. Our Mass Hire Career Center partners and state partners have been excellent on this, along with the municipal partners. And again, this is something we're going to flesh out with many more recommendations over the next month. And so we'll have more information on our website. So again, as I wrap up and then we'll turn to some Q&A, this is really how we're thinking about it. So there's an immediate response that you all have been involved in. Now we're starting in the recovery. So we want to think about ways that we can help businesses reopen as quickly as possible, help people get into longer term positions. But then how do we mitigate and prepare for what's coming ahead? How do we help people develop their financial resources and be more sustainable and more prepared for what comes in the future? So I'm going to wrap up and we'll turn it over to questions and answers. But certainly this is our contact information. Feel free to reach out to all of us about any questions around this presentation. We provide support to municipalities on a daily basis. That's what we do, either through one-off questions or longer term projects. And we'd be happy to answer any questions of yours. So our contact information is here. And again, Raul Gonzalez is coordinating our work with the Economic Development Administration and can provide assistance on any grant applications. I'm now going to...
Great, thank you so much, Betsy. I'm going to try to grab Jack's question. Jack McKean, you're unmuted.
Good afternoon, folks. I am chair of the Economic Development Committee in Maynard. I had two comments to make, first of which is addressed to you, Mark. If you happen to be a large enough community, so you have an economic development corporation, a community development corporation, a business improvement district, or things like that, you may have additional financial flexibility relative to helping small businesses or other businesses in your town. But if you don't have that, asking for suspension of the anti-aid amendment would be an interesting exercise in terms of allowing communities to potentially use community funds, taxpayer dollars for individual situations. If you use it for everybody, it's okay, but one of the earlier examples was somebody had maybe as a private parking lot and wanted to make some contribution to that for the greater benefit of businesses and so forth. So that's one comment. I don't know whether other communities have any issue with that. The second comment is reinforcing stuff that Betsy has said. Particularly in smaller communities, you have limited financial staff. They're stressed with just getting through this year, preparing the budget for next year. But you really do need to get as close to data-driven decisions as you can, and spending a little extra time in asking the most precise questions as you can to focus the efforts. The example for us is we finally asked our community financial people about the impact of suspending personal property taxes, which we have, or deferred them, and then suspending the penalties, which we have done. But ask the very specific questions so that whether you have a city council, board of selectmen, whatever, they're able to see the data and feel comfortable in making the decision. So I'm just reinforcing the Betsy's point or the MAPC point. Take the time to formulate precise questions. It'll help the whole decision process. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Jack. And I know Maynard has an excellent downtown, so just thinking about the impact of all the work that you all are doing there. I'll turn it back over to Emily.
All right, I just wanted to check to see if there's any more questions. There was a question on Facebook about the materials that are being shared. So thank you to Paul from Norwood. We are gonna take that and we'll share that in the follow-up. But there was a question out there, if there's any other municipalities that have drafted guidance, would you be willing to share?
If you send those to me or to the folks on my team, we can certainly compile them and figure out the best way to get information out. You all are your best resource to each other. And certainly we've learned that in our projects, so we'd be happy to share any examples or best practices.
And then Betsy, there's one more question from Facebook. How are communities balancing expanding space for pedestrians and bicyclists, and then balancing that out with autos, cars and other vehicles?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I'm going to steal some great ideas from our transportation team, because we worked collectively on some recommendations on this, where they were thinking about shared streets. So again, this is all going to need to be done carefully and thoughtfully as you're thinking about balancing different uses of the street. But I know a number of different communities. I live in Boston, they're experimenting with this now, carefully and thoughtfully, allowing multiple uses on the street. So this is blocking off a section of the street so that it's pedestrian and bike only, setting up temporary bike lanes, allowing for folks, again, as I mentioned, if restaurants are going to be selling outside, keeping the sidewalk space available for ADA accessibility, but then allowing them to sell in the street. And again, Paul, your thoughts on that from Norwood are going to be very helpful. And again, it has to do with balancing all of these different needs. So how do we understand what people need and what's going to be safest? One thing that we are thinking about, though, is this could be a time for incredible creativity, because you need to be creative, because businesses are really constrained. So could this be, and I know change is hard for the constituents that you're working with, but this is a temporary change. We're going to try this out. We'll see how it goes. And generally, our experience has been with changes like that, bike lanes, if they're done thoughtfully, people actually warm up to the idea, especially if it's presented as a temporary change. We're just going to try this and see how it goes.
Okay, we still have 2 more minutes. If anyone has a question, please let us know, and you can hit the participants button. And in the bottom corner, you can raise your hand, or you could also write your question in the chat. I'll give everyone a moment. See if these last couple of moments you can sort of wrangle the question or comment. All right. Well, if there are no comments then or questions, I will pass this over to Betsy to close us out.
Great. Thank you all. I know that was a lot of information. So we're going to send, if you don't already have the PowerPoint, we'll send it out again. We'll also send out a quick little FAQ with some of the questions that came up on the chat. Again, as I mentioned, all of you are doing phenomenal work. I was in your shoes, and I'm just thinking about how challenging it is right now as you balance the needs of every small business and unemployed individuals in your community. So we just want to say from MAPC's perspective how grateful we are for all the work that you're doing, for the advocacy that you're doing. As Mark mentioned, we are working closely with the administration, so we would love to get your ideas. What are the things that are hindering you from being able to do good work in your communities? Because as we said, now could be an opportunity for flexibility and creativity, because we need to be in this situation. So again, please feel free to contact us. In the information in the PowerPoint, we're happy to answer any questions or to help you think about the needs of your particular communities. Again, huge thank you to our team and to all of our incredible partners. I'm seeing many of your faces right now, and I'm grateful to be working with all of you. Have a good rest of the day. Thank you.
Great. For those of you who wanted to take a moment, you can hop off, but